sure that we're better prepared next time.
Well, we certainly hope that we've all learned, a very obviously harsh lesson, unfortunately, but we do hope we've learned a lesson so that we can do and meet this kind of a stress or tragedy in the future in a much better way. Dr. Tenor Venema, she is professor of nursing at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, as we mentioned, of course, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Radio, on the phone from Sarasota, Florida. All right, coming up, folks, we're going to continue to, of course, track the markets for you, but also going to track the reopenings that we are seeing increasingly. New York City opening its doors, getting ready for phase two, but there are still a lot of problems, especially when it comes to transportation. We'll get into that in just a moment, right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com.
There are around 700,000 so-called dreamers whose protection will now continue. President Trump has lashed out on Twitter, calling the ruling horrible and politically charged. US President Donald Trump, also in the news for this story, calling a tell-all book by his former national security advisor a, quote, compilation of lies and made-up stories. In excerpts released recently, John Bolton alleges Trump asked foreign leaders, including the Chinese President Xi Jinping, to help him to get re-elected. A report by the French Human Rights Commission says black people there face more discrimination in the country than any other minority, and the police need better training to deal with racist disputes. Nigeria is officially polio-free. It's been removed from the list of countries where the virus is endemic. It's been almost 6 years since the last case of the polio virus struck there. The World Health Organization says the country must remain vigilant to ensure it doesn't return. In the last 30 years, the number of polio cases worldwide has fallen by 99%. But the virus does remain endemic in 2 countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan. For more on this, let's talk now to Ahmed Idris, who's in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Ahmed, this is great news, undoubtedly. How have they done it?
Well, basically, it follows aggressive vaccination, polio vaccination, door-to-door vaccination. Really, when you go into so many communities in Nigeria, you find that every month or every 2-3 months, you see government rolling out immunization plans or immunization programs going from door to door, from village to village and community to community, trying to see that children under the age of 5 are vaccinated. And by the way, this is not the first time Nigeria has been taken off the endemic list. In 2014, there was a similar, 2015, there was a similar move by World Health Organization. However, an index case was reported among internally displaced persons camp in Bama in northeast Nigeria, and then the certification was put on hold. In 2019, Nigeria clocked 3 years without a single case of poliomyelitis, and that necessitated the move by the Nigerian government to seek for certification from the World Health Organization as a polio-free country. And that is coming today alongside countries like South Sudan, which also acknowledge that the World Health Organization has accepted its certification or has certified it as polio-free, effectively meaning that Africa is now polio-free. However, how the countries deal with a re-emergence of the polio is what remains to be seen. Peter?
Ahmed, thanks very much. Burundi's new president, Evariste Ndayishimiye, has been sworn into office today. He was declared winner of last month's election. He takes office more than 2 months early after the sudden death of the former president, Pierre Nkurunziza. Malcolm Webb has more from Nairobi.
Evariste Ndayishimiye was sworn in at a ceremony in a football stadium in the capital. The reason he's being sworn in now is following the sudden death of his predecessor, Pierre Nkurunziza, who died last week. The government said he died from a heart attack, although many people believe he actually died from COVID-19. Now, Nkurunziza didn't have any policies to try and slow the spread of the coronavirus in Burundi. Within recent months, there have been sporting events continuing as usual, political rallies in the lead up to a controversial election last month. Thousands of people are gathered together. And so one thing people are waiting to see is if this is going to change under the new leader. But looking at that ceremony today, no sign of change at all. There was no social distancing, people sitting next to each other in the stadium, hundreds of soldiers parading in a military parade. So far, no change of policy there. And the other thing people are waiting to see if it will change is Burundi's record on human rights. Nkurunziza, particularly in the later part of his 15-year rule, has come under widespread criticism for growing reports of political killings, torture and crushing of all dissenting voices. Tens of thousands of Burundians have fled the country. Journalists, rights activists and so on, political opposition, many of them are in exile. And now Evariste Ndayishimiye has been a key player in the ruling party which is responsible for a lot of these things. So people are waiting to see if his new leadership will amount to any kind of change of direction or not.
It's been nearly 10 years since the UN called for a major cleanup in Nigeria's Niger Delta, but a new report says little has actually been done. Decades of oil spills have caused severe damage to the Delta. In 2011, the UN said the cleanup could take 30 years and cost $1 billion. Up to 40 million people face major health risks because of contamination to agricultural land, fisheries and drinking water. The region has also seen a rise in infant mortality. The study also found UN-backed emergency measures on water and health protection have not been implemented properly. The investigation by pressure groups, including Friends of the Earth and Amnesty, found cleanup work had only begun on 11% of the contaminated sites. In a statement, Shell Petroleum Nigeria, which operates in the Niger Delta, said this report fails to recognize that the majority of the UN Environment Programme's recommendations need multi-stakeholder efforts coordinated by the federal government of Nigeria, and that Shell has acted on all recommendations directed to it in the UNEP report. We continue to actively support the cleanup process along with other stakeholders. There are reports of a landslide in Ivory Coast that's killed at least 13 people. The landslide occurred on the northern outskirts of the country's main city, Abidjan. Many residents are missing and the search is underway for possible survivors. It's understood the disaster struck in the early hours of Thursday morning. Senior military officers from India and China are expected to hold talks after 20 Indian soldiers died in a skirmish on the border. It comes a day after top diplomats from the two countries spoke over the phone and agreed to de-escalate the crisis. Tensions peaked on Monday in the Galwan Valley region in the Himalayas, with the worst fighting there in decades.
After this incident, both sides had communication and coordination via military and diplomatic channels. Both sides agreed to deal with this serious matter caused by this conflict at the valley. In a just manner, we will jointly observe the consensus made in commander-level talks and de-escalate the tension as soon as possible in order to safeguard peace and tranquility.
China's top decision-making body is considering a draft of Hong Kong's controversial security bill that has been widely criticised. The Standing Committee of the National People's Congress is reviewing the bill, but it failed to pass in Hong Kong's legislature because of strong opposition there. The legislation sparked a new wave of pro-democracy protests when it was announced in May. It's feared the law will curb freedoms in Hong Kong, something the authorities have dismissed. In the Netherlands, the number of homeless people has doubled in recent years. There are urgent calls to build tens of thousands of new houses every year, but that situation is being made even worse because of the coronavirus pandemic. Step Vassen reports now from The Hague.
Nout Manders suddenly found himself among a growing group of homeless people in the Netherlands. The 30-year-old waiter could no longer pay his rent after he lost his income due to the COVID-19 pandemic and landed on the street. Now he's staying in a shelter.
It's really hard because, especially for my age, it's like you're not earning enough for the free sector, but I'm earning too much to get social housing. And in Amsterdam, there's a waiting list, like for 16 years at least before you get a chance on a house.
The Netherlands needs 1 million houses in the next 10 years. While construction companies have been able to continue to build despite COVID-19 restrictions, they say the target of more than 80,000 houses a year has become difficult.
De oorzaak daarvan moet vooral gevonden worden in...
The main reason is the lack of land. In the Netherlands, approvals take a long time, sometimes up to 10 years before a project can be executed. With the corona crisis, this has only become worse.
The Dutch do what they do best, making new land, like here where an island is being created. But developers say the only way to meet the huge demand is to build outside the cities and convert green areas. They promise sustainable and climate-friendly housing.
We need a lot of houses. 1 million is a lot for the Netherlands. We have 7.5 million right now, so we need actually an extra big city. And you can't place that inside of the boundaries of the current cities.
The government has yet to respond to the plea to invest billions of dollars in the next few years. Politicians didn't immediately reject the plan to sacrifice green areas. The Netherlands used to have adequate social housing and the number of homeless were low. But miscalculations by the government and the far-reaching privatization of the housing sector have led to a serious housing crisis. While developers urge the government to invest, the question remains when houses will become affordable again. Social housing has been rapidly disappearing from big cities. That's because corporations sold tens of thousands of houses for high prices in recent years, turning cities like Amsterdam into places mainly for the rich. Not a city Nout can longer afford.
You never know how things are going to happen, and you can lose your job every day, but you can also lose your house every day, and that was something I was never aware of.
Developers say that 1/3 of the new projects they hope to build with government support will be for social housing. But Nout says he can't afford to wait. He can't stay in shelters much longer and needs a roof above his head now. Step Vassen, Al Jazeera, The Hague.
Argentina is expected to extend restrictions around the capital as coronavirus infection rates continue to rise. The bulk of new infections are being detected around the capital, Buenos Aires. Latin America is currently the epicenter of the pandemic, but so far Argentina has weathered the pandemic better than many of its neighbors. A nationwide lockdown was imposed on March the 20th that's been gradually loosened and is now only active in certain areas. Teresa Bow has more now from El Tigre, just north of Buenos Aires.
We're here in Tigre, in greater Buenos Aires, home to between 12 and 13 million people. This is a neighborhood that has been completely isolated because of a surge of corona cases in this area. People are being disrespected as they come into this neighborhood. This has been a strategy by the Argentinian government since it imposed a lockdown 3 months ago. Security forces were on the streets controlling people and asking them to stay in their homes and isolating areas like this one where there's been a surge in coronavirus cases. There's been a surge of coronavirus cases in recent months in Argentina, and that's why the government is considering extending the quarantine that it imposed 3 months ago. It was one of the first countries in Latin America to impose a lockdown, and that's why it has prevented the spread of the disease, at least in Argentina. President Alberto Fernandez on Wednesday went on voluntary isolation because there's been a surge of cases among Argentina's political class. His popularity has been running high over his handling of the pandemic, but it's Argentina's economy that has many people here worried. Argentina is on default. It's negotiating with foreign creditors. It's also handling double-digit inflation in this country, and the possibility of recession has people here in poor neighborhoods like this one extremely worried.
Now, the World Health Organization's top scientist says work on a number of potential coronavirus vaccines are progressing to the next phase. That's after the organization stopped testing of the malaria drug hydroxychloroquine, with data showing no benefit to patients.
So we're entering a new phase now of vaccine trials, the phase 3 trials, which are the ones that will definitively prove whether a vaccine is efficacious and safe. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but vaccine development is a complex undertaking. It comes with a lot of uncertainty. The good thing is we have many different vaccine candidates and platforms. So even if the first one fails or the second fails, we shouldn't lose hope. We shouldn't give up.
The British government's reviewing its 2-metre social distancing guidelines as the number of virus cases falls. The review follows warnings from the hospitality sector that businesses and jobs could be severely affected when they reopen if the current restrictions remain in place. Niamh Barker now from London.
Expect rules and regulations if and when British bars and restaurants reopen next month. The industry thrives on bringing people together, but it's now carefully considering how to keep people apart. And the difference between 1 metre or 2 metre distancing rules could cost British businesses millions in lost profits.
With a 2 metre rule, our capacity would be reduced dramatically, and in some instances, our bars would be up to 80% of normal trade because they're really small. In this location where it's bigger, it would be less impact. But a 1 metre rule allows us to trade all of our bars with less of an impact.
The industry, accounting for 3.5 million jobs, is now clamouring for clarity on what to expect and when.
The difference between 2 metres and 1 metre is the difference between success and failure of the restart and recovery of hospitality for many of our businesses. It is the difference between having a fighting chance and having to remain closed, and some of them may never reopen if they remain closed much longer.
The UK is one of several countries to adopt the 2 metre guideline. Spain and Canada have done too. Other countries in Europe, including Germany and the Netherlands, advise staying 1.5 metres apart, while the World Health Organization say that the safety distance should be around 1 metre. That's been followed by France and China. When it comes to balancing the health of the economy with public health, there's very little margin of error. Last month, the British government's chief scientific advisor said the risk of catching COVID-19 is between 10 and 30 times higher 1 metre from an infected person than it is at 2 metres. These warnings have worried the public and paralysed the Prime Minister Boris Johnson over what to do next. 40,000 deaths and soaring unemployment have dented confidence in the government. It has to get social distancing right, or risk a second spike in infections. But medical experts say it's an imperfect science.
To be honest, Niamh, we just don't know. We don't know what at the bottom of all this, which is most effective. And of course, it's a balance. It's not just the distance that we have between us, it's the amount of time that we spend with other people as well, and what other protection we might use, including masks in some instances.
Retailers have been tentatively reopening across the country, adapting their stores to abide by government guidelines. But questions still remain on how distancing rules will apply to schools when face-to-face teaching returns. As the world awaits a vaccine, the government says it's looking for a margin to manoeuvre. Niamh Barker, Al Jazeera, London.
The French President Emmanuel Macron's on his first overseas trip since the virus outbreak. He's been meeting with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in London. The two men are expected to discuss the COVID-19 response and perhaps Brexit. Earlier, along with Prince Charles, Macron placed a wreath at the statue of the French World War II leader Charles de Gaulle. Now, looks like I'm out of a job pretty soon.
দিদিনের রুটিন আমাদের সুস্থ থাকতে সাহায্য করে
الرياضة كثير مفيدة حركوا رجليك.
Elmo's World News will air over the next few weeks in 13 languages around the globe. The special episode of Sesame Street is aimed at helping children cope with the coronavirus pandemic. It'll share activities, games, and advice on how to manage big feelings like frustration and sadness. Still to come here on the News Hour, Formula One returns to the streets of Italy. Lee has the details for you when we come back with his sports news. It's time for sport. Here's Lee.
Thank you. As the corruption trial of former World Athletics chief Lamine Diack comes to a close, his lawyer says it's cruel for prosecutors to seek a 4-year prison term. 87-year-old Diack attended the last day of the hearings in Paris on Thursday. He and his son, Papa Massata Diack, are accused of taking bribes worth millions of dollars from Russian athletes to cover up failed dope tests. Diack claims he was not trying to protect the athletes, but wanted to stop the cases coming out all at once to limit the damage to world athletics, formerly known as the IAAF. Prosecutors are seeking 4 years for Diack and 5 years for his son, who fled to his native Senegal when the investigation began.
We find it inhumane. 4 years in jail for an 87-year-old man who is ill is inhumane. It's of great cruelty. He's an elderly man facing a sentence given out for the worst crimes, like murders. We will demonstrate that the prosecution distorted the facts to create this kind of corruptive realm, which would have been orchestrated by father and son. It's absurd.
Manchester United manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has described his striker Marcus Rashford as a top human being. The 22-year-old led a campaign which forced the British government into a U-turn over their free school meal policy. It's set to benefit around 1.3 million vulnerable children.
Marcus is such a top human being, and he's brought his own experiences as a kid into this conversation and changed the lives of so many kids this summer, which is more important than any game of football that he'll probably play. He's proving all the time his human qualities, which is a main attribute for a Man United player, along with his qualities as a player, of course.
United's first game back after the Premier League restart is on Friday against Tottenham and their old manager, Jose Mourinho. And he too was full of praise for his former player, Rashford.
The government realized that was the right thing to do, so they shouldn't wait for one player to come publicly to put some pressure for that to happen. But the 18-year-old kid that I met a few years ago to fight for kids very similar to him when he was a young kid is something very, very nice from Marcus.
The Black Lives Matter movement received backing on day one of the Premier League restart. Players' shirt names were replaced by the message, and before kick-off in both games on Wednesday, teams and staff took the knee.
We should say that white people is apologize, say sorry. The way we treat the black people in the last 400 years or 4 centuries. So I feel ashamed what we have done for these marvelous black people around the world. It's not a problem about the USA and the United States of America, what happened for Mr. Floyd. I think it's the problem of racism is in everywhere.
Well, Manchester City are waiting to find out if they've won the appeal against their 2-year ban from European football. But the financial fair play rules that UEFA found City guilty of breaking are going to be temporarily relaxed because of coronavirus. UEFA has just announced it wants to make sure clubs are not punished for unforeseen losses caused by the pandemic. So club accounts for the next 2 financial years will be assessed together rather than separately to allow time to recuperate losses. Napoli have won the first trophy of the Italian season. They beat Juventus in a tense penalty shootout to clinch the Coppa Italia on another frustrating night for Juve's star player Cristiano Ronaldo. Joanna Gazarovska reports.
Italian football returned to action last week, but Cristiano Ronaldo's sharpness remains absent. The Portuguese star failed to score in the first leg of this final and was denied again on Wednesday. Napoli had plenty of opportunities to score too, but Juve's keeper Gianluigi Buffon kept them at bay. With the score 0-0 at full time, the match went straight to penalties because players are still getting back into shape. And that's when the rust really began to show for Juve. Paulo Dybala's shot was saved. Brazilian Danilo sent his spot kick into the empty stands, and before they knew it, Juve were 2-0 down. Polish striker Arkadiusz Milik converted the decisive penalty to seal it 4-2. If Cristiano Ronaldo had been waiting to take a spot kick, he missed his chance. Instead, it was Napoli who took the spotlight and the copper in the first major triumph for coach Gennaro Gattuso.
I am a young coach. Had I lost this final as well, people would have tagged me as a loser, because I had already lost 2 finals and this was the 3rd. And it is tough to live football the way I do, but it's the only way I know. And that's why I feel the victory inside, because I know where we started. I know how difficult and stressful I made life for my players and for the people who work in this club, and I think we deserve it.
I'm angry and disappointed. When you lose on penalties, the disappointment and the anger are even stronger, because you end up with the feeling that winning or losing only depends on luck. If one has to lose a final, maybe it's better to lose it after the 90 minutes, rather than on a penalty shootout.
Unable to be in Rome for the final because of coronavirus restrictions, fans flooded the streets of Naples to celebrate. After the 3-month sporting break because of the pandemic, the trophy and the night finally belonged to them. Joanna Gazarovska, Al Jazeera.
The world's top wheelchair tennis player has accused US Open organisers of discrimination after the sport was dropped from this year's event in New York. Paralympian Dylan Alcott says players were not consulted. This tournament will be played behind closed doors in August because of coronavirus restrictions. On Twitter, he wrote, "I thought I did enough to qualify. 2 times champion, #1 in the world, but unfortunately I missed the only thing that mattered, being able to walk. Disgusting discrimination." Finally, Formula One teams are counting down to the season start with the first race in Austria just over 2 weeks away. There was an unusual sight on the Italian streets on Thursday morning. Charles Leclerc took his car out for a drive through Maranello, where the team is based. The dawn drive to the test track may have woken up a few residents, but at least he beat the morning rush hour. That's all your sport. More later.
Lee, thank you very much. That was our news hour. My colleague in London, Lauren Taylor, will be back in a moment with more of the day's news. I will see you very soon. Thanks for watching. For the moment, bye-bye.